When an NFL scout sits down to do the evaluation process, do you think they just watch a ton of film? Absolutely not. Do you think that they just go to their favorite web page or pop open a newspaper and look at box scores? Not a chance. It's the deep diving analytics that NFL teams use to separate themselves from their competition. Heck, you can see it by the way sporting teams hire these days. Guys out of Stanford, Yale, Harvard, no sporting background whatsoever, but they are hired to come in and run whole analytical departments for major sporting teams now. That is how they get a leg up on their competition, and they find value in players that nobody else is doing. And we are no different here at the Fantasy Headliners. We take a look at everything: in-depth analytics, film review, all the numbers that we can possibly dive into to help give us an advantage over everybody else, especially for you in your fantasy football competition. And today's video is going to be exactly that. I am talking about the top 20 draft eligible wide receivers for 2025 and who was the most explosive last college football season. I did a video very similar to this last week, but I talked about running backs. This video is based off the same exact thing, and this concept I'm using is largely based off my dynamic running back rating, an algorithm that I created that has predicted the breakouts of several NFL running backs over the course of the last several years, that gives us a leg up on our competition because we can find high upside value in players nobody is talking about. So make sure you lock it in with a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new here. The first category that we're going to be talking about in this video is going to be receptions. And it is no shock whatsoever that we see Travis Hunter at the top of this list, because he's going to be at the top of basically every list we talk about today, except maybe a couple. Ty Felton from Maryland, he was tied with Travis Hunter with 96 receptions. And then there's names that you're already familiar with: Jaden Higgins, Tet McMillan, Emeka Ibuka, Jalen Knoll. There's a lot of guys here at the very top that we're already talking about on a consistent basis leading up to the draft. But this video is going to be broken down into a couple of different sections. The first group of statistics we are taking a look at are what are called volume stats: receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. And then we're going to dive into that really nitty gritty. These are the categories that I like to call dynamic stats. These are the stats that we take a look at that are on a per touch basis. So when someone gets the football in their hands, we're not taking a look at their overall season. We're taking a look at what they do per touch. And that's how we find a ton of value. And that's how we find guys that maybe they don't have numbers that pop off the page, but they have the tools that do. There's also a couple of guys towards the bottom of this list that are being talked about quite a bit this year as well. Matthew Golden is one of them. Now, Matthew Golden, you have to remember that he had Isaiah Bond with him there at Texas, and they definitely love to spread the ball around. So it will be really interesting to see what the numbers say about Matthew Golden, because coming into the draft process, he was definitely considered one of the top wide receivers, but it wasn't until the combine that he really thrust himself up to being considered maybe even the wide receiver one off the board. But what about receiving yards? And the one thing that I like to look at when I look at receiving yards is the difference between receptions and receiving yards. I want to see, I don't care if you have a lower amount of receptions, give me as many receiving yards as possible. If you have a ton of receptions, but you have a fewer amount of receiving yards, that doesn't show me a ton of dynamic playmaking ability. So for instance, when we're taking a look at it, one of the categories that we'll look at here in a minute is yards per reception, which is essentially kind of what we're looking at now. But let's talk about it a little bit more in terms of who had the most receptions and the most receiving yards. So Tet McMillan led the country in terms of draft eligible wide receivers with 1,316 receiving yards. Travis Hunter was right there behind him at number 2. Now, in terms of receptions, Tet McMillan was 4th in receptions, but 1st in receiving yards. That is a positive gain in receiving yards. I like to see that. Less receptions, I don't care. What did he do to maximize them? That shows a lot of big playmaking ability. Travis Hunter went from 1 in receptions, 2 in receiving yards. That's not that big of a deal. One name that's going to pop up quite a bit, and we're going to talk about him more at the end, is Kyle Williams out of Washington State. He was ranked 8th in receptions out of this group of wide receivers with 70, but 3rd in receiving yards. Keep that in mind as we move forward. Jalen Noel out of Iowa State, he went from 7 in receptions, he went to 4th in receiving yards. Jaden Higgins, a little bit of a drop. 3rd in receptions, 5th in receiving yards. But then you go all the way down to the bottom here, and you see a guy like Luther Burden. Now, Luther Burden is considered a fringe one wide receiver. A lot of people look at him and feel like he's Deebo Samuel 2.0. But what I don't love to see is that he's 12th in receptions with 61 last year, but he drops all the way down to 16th in receiving yards. He is definitely one that we are going to dive into more in this video because Luther Burden is widely considered like the type of analytical darling that people say, yeah, he didn't have the greatest numbers, but it's what he does when he has the football in his hands. Well, when he has the football in his hands, I don't know if the numbers are going to really match up with what people see on tape, which is something that you have to do. Look at the tape and talk about the numbers. Now, when we take a look at receiving touchdowns, I really don't translate those to the NFL all that much because the college game can be vastly different, especially the offensive structure of college offenses compared to what people will play in at the NFL level. So when you see some guys that you roll through here with like an Isaiah Bond, he had 5 touchdowns last year. He's at the very bottom of the list. He's going to be considered like a burner type. He's way closer to being like an Xavier Worthy type of player than a guy that's going to win all over the field. He's going to stretch the field like Xavier Worthy, but Xavier Worthy runs a little bit better of a route tree than what Isaiah Bond does. So when you see him with so few receiving touchdowns, that's not really something I'm factoring into whether or not Bond is going to be all that good at the next level. But when you go to the top, Travis Hunter, Kyle Williams, just talked about him. He pops up again. One of my favorite underappreciated wide receivers in this draft, Xavier Restrepo out of Miami, 3rd with 11 receiving touchdowns last year. Going to be very interesting to see what his final score is when we get to the end here. Emeka Ibuka, he was tied at 4th with Pat Bryant and Tez Johnston. Guys like a Jaden Higgins, he's going to be a guy that's going to be like a red zone type of player. When you scroll down like a Jalen Royals, people are really talking about him as well. Jalen Noel out of Iowa State. We've talked about him a couple of times already. He had 8 touchdowns last year. So receiving touchdowns, I include them in this because, again, we're taking volume stats and kind of adding them into those dynamic stats. The one statistic that I give the least amount of credit to here, though, is going to be the receiving touchdowns. But let's go ahead and jump into the dynamic stats now. And the first one we're going to talk about is yards per reception. Now, I already mentioned this one a couple of minutes ago, right? When we talked about the receptions and the receiving yards, that kind of was in line with what we saw in terms of yards per reception. So guys at the top, Pat Bryant, Trey Harris. There are a lot of people that are a fan of Trey Harris right now. And again, we will talk about him a little bit more at the end of the video. I also think that maybe I'm not giving him enough credit. And even though I've already done my positional rankings and Trey Harris wasn't included with the wide receivers, I think he deserves a little bit more respect. That's one guy that maybe I haven't done enough with, or I haven't given enough credit that maybe I need to now, so I might make some adjustments there. How about Kyle Williams, once again, showing up at the very top of one of these lists? Matthew Golden. Now, this is where Matthew Golden will start to pop up a little bit more. 4th in yards per reception, and we'll see what the rest of the numbers say, but he's a big play type of guy, and that is what he's going to do at the NFL level. How about a guy like Xavier Restrepo? Once again, I like Xavier Restrepo an awful lot. He is a guy that I think will be very good at the NFL level, but he's like a slot wide receiver. And when I kind of took Xavier Restrepo and looked at what he did on tape, it really reminds me of Cooper Kupp. He's a guy that's kind of under the radar, is going to be really good in the slot, but he can do some different things all over the field. One thing Cooper Kupp could do was take some of those slot catches and take it for some big yards. Xavier Restrepo obviously can do the same exact thing, and we're seeing it right here, right now. Isaiah Bond, we talked about him being a big-time playmaker. The Texas wide receivers, overall, big-time playmakers. Another thing that's concerning, though, is Luther Burden being all the way towards the bottom of this list. Him and Savion Williams both. Savion Williams is compared to like a Cordero Patterson, a guy that could play some running back, a guy that could play some wide receivers, maybe return some kicks, things of that nature. I need to see some more explosive playmaking ability, and his yards per receptions, it's a lot to be. I just don't feel that he's got that big playmaking ability. We'll see what some of the other numbers say, but yards per reception is not the end all be all, but I don't love what I'm seeing here either from him. One of my favorite categories to talk about, yards after the catch per reception. When the wide receiver gets the ball in their hands, what do they do with it? Oh, look at this. Kyle Williams at the very top. Kyle Williams will be getting way more respect out of me after after this video is done. He's going to be getting a pretty big bump in my rankings. I'm going to go back to the tape with him. I'm going to look at a few more things, but the deep diving analytics show us some things that we should absolutely love. Guys like Jalen Lane, Isaiah Bond, Jalen Royals, Trey Harris, Tez Johnson. Again, some of the guys that are considered bigger playmakers in offenses that kind of spread things out and really drive the ball down the field sometimes. All of these guys here towards the top of yards after the catch per reception. Xavier Restrepo, we just talked about him with yards per reception. A very admirable score here again at number 6 and yards after the catch per reception. Savion Williams. Now, this is where we can offset some things. Him and Luther Burden. So both of these guys, when you took a look at yards per reception, so Savion Williams was 20th in yards per reception, but he's 8th in yards after the catch per reception. Luther Burden was 18th, but he's 10th in yards after the catch per reception. So one thing that shows us from Savion Williams and Luther Burden is the fact that they probably got a lot of targets that were either behind the line of scrimmage or at the line of scrimmage. So even though we didn't see big overall playmaking yards out of them, yards after the catch per reception can help tell a different story of where these guys may have been getting their receptions. Again, a guy like Emeka Ibuka, right? He was 15th, he's up to 12th. So another thing where maybe some of those targets they were getting were more short yardage, which is absolutely fine. Now, guys like Matthew Golden, Tet McMillan, Travis Hunter, Jalen Noel, Jaden Higgins, Elick Eomanor, a guy that I really like in this year's draft class as well, out of Stanford. All these guys, they're not getting as many yards after the catch per reception because when you take a look at what they do, they're guys that are probably going up for a lot of 50-50 balls, and they're catching those balls on one-on-one coverage down the field, and they're not really translating to a bunch of yards after the catch because they're catching the ball in that type of coverage. It could even be in double coverage, and they're being brought down pretty quickly afterwards. So to see a guy like Luther Burden and Savion Williams be higher than them, or Xavier Restrepo, doesn't really shock me all that much. Yards after the catch per reception, though, when you add that to yards per reception, it allows us to see where maybe those targets have been coming and what that means. So for these guys here towards the bottom that were maybe a little bit higher in yards per reception, they're lower in yards after the catch per reception because maybe their targets were more down the field. All right, yards per route run. So essentially, for every route that you ran as a wide receiver, how many yards were you averaging? So this isn't per catch. This is per how many routes you were running. And Trey Harris is at the very top, and it's not even close. Trey Harris had 5.12 yards per route run. The next closest player, Torrey Horton, was at 3.45. That's a pretty big gap right there. And once again, I think Trey Harris deserves a little bit more respect from me, and I'm going to go ahead and go back to him real quick. But keep in mind, Trey Harris and Kyle Williams are really the guys in this video that so far stick out quite a bit. I will say one thing too, and we'll talk about it a little bit more at the end, but Tet McMillan, the analytical data shows that he is still the number one wide receiver over Matthew Golden. Now, there's one difference here that I think when it translates to the NFL game, it's going to look a little bit different. Tet McMillan, to me, his role is going to kind of reverse where Matthew Golden's role will reverse a little bit as well. Ted McMillan to me is not going to be nearly the type of field stretcher in the NFL that he was at the college level, but he's very, very good in terms of those intermediate routes. He's got a lot of burst, a lot of acceleration. He gets in and out of his cuts very quickly. He is a guy that I think could be moved in the slot. He could be moved outside. He can stretch the field at times, but he's going to be a really tough player to take care of over the middle. A guy that he might be a little bit more like is CeeDee Lamb. Now, CeeDee Lamb overall was a better wide receiver prospect, but Ted McMillan could really match what CeeDee Lamb does. Now, I have basically mocked Ted McMillan to the Dallas Cowboys several times, and I still think that's a good fit because Ted McMillan to me is a little bit more of a field stretcher than what CeeDee Lamb is, but they're both so explosive in the open field over the intermediate part of the field that they can make those short targets into really big gains really quick. Where with Matthew Golden, to me, Matthew Golden is a guy that was really he was a guy that wasn't getting a ton of targets because he had lots of pass catchers around him. He wasn't necessarily the number one target on his team, even though he led the team in targets. So when you take a look at what Matthew Golden can do, I think he's going to be a guy that's a little bit more of a field stretcher, where he's a downfield type of player, more like what a Mike Evans is for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So when you take a look at the numbers for Ted McMillan, the numbers and everything that we're looking at right now with the dynamic data, they seem to back up the fact that Ted McMillan would be that type of a playmaker at the NFL level. So even though if you have Matthew Golden as your wide receiver one, take Travis Hunter out of the equation. If you have Matthew Golden as your wide receiver one, I get it because he's still technically my wide receiver one, and that might change depending on where they fall and who they're drafted to. But Ted McMillan is still very, very close for me. He's still a first round player for me. I do think he falls a little bit more than what we anticipated, but I don't think it's going to be nearly enough to be freaked out by it. All right, let's take a look at contested catch rate. And this is something that I love to see from NFL caliber wide receivers coming out of the draft, because when you're in the draft and you're at the college level, sometimes you find yourself in way more wide open situations. It's something that Travis Hunter found himself in quite a bit at Colorado. He was just so good that people couldn't keep up with him. So when you take a look at his tape and you see a ton of wide open big play catches, you got to think to yourself, is he going to be physical enough at the next level when some of these cornerbacks will be way stronger, way more physical? You might have to fight with safeties a little bit more. So can you play through the catch very well? That is something that I really want to consider. So we're going to take a look at that too. I was a little shocked to see Savion Williams so high up on this compared to where he's been so far. And a lot of the guys who are very good at contested catch rate, you think about those one-on-one type of catches down the field. But when you're catching over the middle of the field and you got a linebacker or a safety draped all over you, the same thing can happen. And Savion Williams, being a guy that's think about more as like one of those gadget players, having a high contested catch rate is a really good thing, especially considering the fact that he's number one at 88.9. Pat Bryant is second closest at 69.2. That's absolutely insane. Where this does become concerning is like Isaiah Bond. Isaiah Bond at the very end, who again is going to be seen as this field stretcher in the NFL level. You take a look at what he's doing, and his contested catch rate is 27.3. He's second from the bottom. Ale Manor from Stanford. Don't love to see him here. Don't love to see Jalen Knowles so far down the list. Those are not good things. Jaden Higgins, Luther Burden right in the middle. Matthew Golden being a little bit higher is a good thing, especially considering the way that we talked about him kind of a few minutes ago and how his role may be reversed at the NFL level. Xavier Restrepo, his name pops up again. Kyle Williams, his name pops up again. Trey Harris, his name pops up again. I was actually a little surprised to see Travis Hunter so high, because Travis Hunter, when you watch his film, you see a ton of big plays where he doesn't even have a cornerback within 5 to 10 yards of him. So to see that he has a good contested catch rate is very good as well, because one of my concerns for Travis Hunter is more physical defensive backs at the NFL level, especially if he's playing both ways again and he's playing defense and offense. As the game wears on and he starts to wear down a little bit, are those big corners and safeties really going to start knocking him around a little bit when he is trying to run in and out of his routes. That's a big concern for Travis Hunter and somewhere that he will need to get better, but it's good to at least see that his contested catch rate in college was so good. All right, last one is missed tackles for. So after these guys get the ball in their hands, are they making people miss, or are they getting tackled right away? This is where Luther Burden finally pops up, and this makes a whole lot of sense that he's up here at number 1, because again, when you watch the film, you can see why he is all the way up here at missed tackles force at number 1, but it's still very concerning because like his yards after the catch per reception is 6.1, and he was ranked 10th out of this group of wide receivers, but he's number 1 in missed tackles for. So why is he not getting more yards after the catch per reception, especially if we already kind of figured out the fact that he might be getting targets that are a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage or even behind it. So the playmaking ability, it's good to see that, but what is he doing after he makes the guys miss? At Missouri, you know, he may have had a whole bunch of guys just, I feel like what I was getting ready to say would have been taken way out of context, because let's just go there. I was going to say Luther Burden may have a whole lot of guys pounding down on top of him. Flag. I don't know where Anna's at right now. If you've been around for a while, though, I have this wacky waving inflatable arm flailing tube man behind me, and when I say things like that, our moderator Anna will turn it on. Because, yeah, I get flagged on the play. And I should be flagged for that one. Let's just keep moving on. Tet McMillan is all the way up here. Good to see for his playmaking ability, especially, again, after I talked about what he may look more like as a wide receiver in the NFL. Ty Felton finally shows back up. He kind of took a dive in some of these dynamic categories. He's back up here at the top. Travis Hunter, Kyle Williams again, Savion Williams is up here as well. Jack Besh is another guy that's getting a lot of love within kind of the deeper fantasy circles right now. And there are some things that do pop up on tape, and there's some good things that you see here as well. And one of the reasons why he is getting a little bit of love of being one of those players that might be drafted in the mid to late rounds of the NFL draft, that if he falls with the right team, he could end up being a playmaker for them. Here are missed tackles for 17, tied at 7th with Jalen Royals and Tez Johnson. You know, really the ones that, again, kind of stand out at the bottom. Jalen Noel, he's the guy that doesn't make a ton of people miss. Matthew Golden doesn't. Emeka Ibuka is kind of surprising to me. For where he finished among all of these players, he doesn't really make a whole lot of guys miss. So he's a guy that will make plays after the catch, but when he's in like that contested catch area and he's got a lot of guys around him, he may be someone that's making the catch and going down pretty quickly, but he's not really making a lot of guys miss to pick up extra yards. So while you'll see some good plays from Emeka Ibuka, you're not going to really see that missed tackle or break tackle capability from him. And some of that has to do with his size, and Trey Harris being right there with him makes a little bit of sense. And then Xavier Restrepo just being a few above him also makes sense. All right, let's take a look at overall score now. And this is basically the average of all of the finishes across the board in all the statistics that we talked about here today. And the lower the score, the better. It's because it means you basically ranked higher in those categories. So the more categories you ranked higher in, the lower your score, which actually is a very good thing here. So when we take a look at overall rank, it was Kyle Williams, and it's not even close. If we, and you, I could be partly to blame for this, and I'm glad I did this video when I did. Kyle Williams needs to be looked at. He needs to be considered, and this is a guy that absolutely should be considered more within fantasy circles based on his potential playmaking ability. Being in Washington State, really not talked about all that much. And at the NFL level, if he takes his playmaking ability that we see here and moves it to the next level, he's going to be a guy that absolutely is going to end up being a playmaker at some point in time. Not only was he ranked number 1 overall, but his score was a 4.12, which was 2 points higher than Travis Hunter, who was at 6.5. That is an absolutely insane difference between number 1 and number 2. Props to Kyle Williams. Dive into him more. I know that I will be. I love what I see here. I got to go back to the tape, though, and see how it meshes up. Travis Hunter, Tet McMillian at 2 and 3. No shock there. We know that these guys are going to be playmakers. Pat Bryant out of Illinois, not someone that really was talked about the entire time throughout this video. He was 17th and 12th in receptions and receiving yards, and he was 4th with 10 receiving touchdowns. So when you take a look at the volume numbers, they weren't like super shocking. It's the dynamic stats where he made up a ton of ground. 1st in yards per reception, 8th in yards after the catch per reception, 5th in yards per route run, 2nd in contested catch rate, 10th in missed tackles forced. So Pat Bryant was a guy that really, this is where we utilize this type of data. When we take a look at a guy like Pat Bryant, we don't see a ton in the box score, and you may not even see a ton on tape because his tape may be limited. He only had 54 receptions last year. So while you look at some of those plays last year, there's not a ton to take a look at. So out of Illinois, you look at all the dynamic stats here, and you see a guy that once he gets the ball in his hands, he knows how to find more yards. He knows how to find the open field. He knows how to pick up more yards. He knows how to get into the end zone. Pat Bryant is also a name that we need to be taking a look at as a sleeper in this year's draft class. Xavier Restrepo doesn't get enough love. I absolutely love this kid. I think he's a very good wide receiver. Cooper Kupp is my comp for him. I'm not shocked to see him this high because when I watched him on film and looked at some of the numbers, you could tell it. Trey Harris, again, Trey Harris is getting a lot of love. I'm not giving him nearly enough love. When I saw his name pop up this high, I knew that I had maybe made a mistake not ranking him higher. So he is a guy, depending on where he lands, you will see a pretty significant shift in my post-draft rookie ranking. So right now, the rookie rankings that we're taking a look at are all great because what I'm taking a look at right now kind of translates to what I think NFL success will look like. But if we're talking fantasy success, you may see Trey Harris way higher depending on when he lands. Let's go ahead and take a look at the tier 2 players. Which guys ended up showing up in tier 2. Jack Besh from TCU, mentioned him here at the end of the video. He is a guy that's getting a lot of love. Ty Felton from Maryland might not be getting a lot of love. And then you've got a guy like Jaden Higgins, who is considered like a fringe one wide receiver at times. And it really feels like guys are kind of between Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel when it comes to those 2 Iowa State wide receivers. Jalen Noel will be in tier 3, so you'll see him in a second. From a playmaking standpoint, Jaden Higgins seems like the superior talent to me right now, and the guy that I would rank higher moving forward after doing this video. Jalen Royals out of Utah State, another name that's kind of getting talked about on under the radar type of player. Tez Johnson finishes in this area for me. I'm still not a big Tez Johnson fan. Not bad in receptions. He had the 5th most receptions out of this group, 82, but he was 13th in receiving yards, 4th in touchdowns. Really the 2 areas that you saw some playmaking ability was yards after the catch per reception and yards per route run. But being the number 1 wide receiver at Oregon with Dylan Gabriel, that really kind of pushes some of those numbers up. He did have 17 missed tackles forced, which was tied for 7th among this group. So good to see some numbers right there. I wouldn't put him in tier 2 overall rankings, but maybe he deserves to be a little bit higher than what I've had him. Emeka Ibuka, I would have loved to see him a little bit higher, but I think it really dives into the fact that once he gets he's a good pass catcher and he's a guy that can get himself open and runs good routes. But once he gets the ball in his hands, he can find the open field and he can do some things there. But if he's making catches over the middle of the field with a lot of defenders around him, typically he's going to go down pretty quickly after that. And that's why he didn't score much higher than what we see him here. Let's go on to tier 3 now. This is when Jalen Noel shows up, who we just talked about. Absolutely insane to see Matthew Golden this low. For a guy that a lot of us, including myself, consider to be the wide receiver 1 in this draft class, I wonder if I need to rethink that a little bit, because even though there's good things that show up on paper, he was outside the top 10 in receptions, outside the top 10 in receiving yards, tied for 7th in touchdowns, 4th in yards per reception, but then he was 14th in yards after the catch per reception, 16th in yards per route run, 17th in missed tackles forced. His contested catch rate, though, was 61.1, which was 8th. So Matthew Golden, to me, is a playmaker down the field, but not really a playmaker with the ball in his hands, which is why a few minutes ago I kind of said maybe he's more like Mike Evans than anything. Mike Evans is a great contested catch guy. He can catch the ball down the field. He's a great red zone target. He can do 90,000 different things well. But one thing Mike Evans doesn't really do that well is he's not a guy that you're going to throw a slant to and he's going to take it 15, 20, 25, 30 yards, anything like that. Matthew Golden, kind of the same thing for me. So while there's a place for him at the very top, I will tell you that based on this data right here, I do believe that Tet McMillan has the higher ceiling in the NFL than Matthew Golden, even though Matthew Golden and some of his traits may make him a little bit safer. Savion Williams, for being a guy who is seen as Savion Williams and Luther Burden, for being a guy that are considered to be weapons on the football field, especially after the catch, they didn't score nearly high enough for me. Savion Williams I wasn't as high on as some people are, and Luther Burden to me is a guy that I've had him lower, I've had him higher. I've dropped him, I raised him, I dropped him, I raised him. I've put him in the first round sometimes. I've taken him into the second round sometimes. I think someone is going to draft him in the first round. But me personally, I have a second round grade on him. And these numbers that I see here, even though there's playmaking ability there with the missed tackles forced, there's not enough in the other areas for me to be super excited. 12th in receptions, 16th in receiving yards, 14th in touchdowns, 18th in yards per reception, 10th in yards after the catch per reception, 14th in yards per route run, 12th in contested catch rate, 1st in missed tackles forced. I really wanted to see a little bit more out of him here, and I didn't see it. Okay, the final tier, the bottom of the barrel, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time down here. Alec Aominer, I mean, I've talked about him already. I do see some good things on tape from him, but he was very limited in a very bad Stanford offense. So while these numbers don't look great, this is why we always tell people there is film and analytics. You can't lean one way or the other. If you go on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, there are guys who will say, I'm only a film guy. There are guys who are say, I'm only a stats guy or only an analytics guy or a woman, either way. And I think that's a wrong way to do it because I think there's such a bias towards one way or the other that you miss things when you don't watch film or you don't look at the numbers. So when you look at Aominer here, the numbers don't look great, so that's why we go to the film. And when you go to the film, you see something from him that could definitely be one of those red zone type of targets at the NFL level where he's not going to be super fast, but he's going to be an X wide receiver that if he's the number 2, number 3 target on the team, but at least the number 2 wide receiver, he's going to get some nice one-on-one coverage against cornerback 2s, and he's going to be able to do some things where he wins a little bit more. But unfortunately, playing at Stanford in a really bad offense with a quarterback that just wasn't getting the job done, his numbers don't look that great. Isaiah Bond was, if he would have ran a fast 40, I would have been more concerned about it. I'm not really that concerned because no one's really jumping to grab Isaiah Bond. If he would have been close to Xavier Worthy's last year, I would have been really scared for people to overdraft him, but I don't think that's going to happen. Jalen Lane, Torrey Horton are the last two to finish us out. But Headliner Nation, it's draft week, and I have been spending the last few months here grinding tape, looking at numbers, and the work this week is kind of a culmination of everything and what we have done as a group working through the NFL draft process this season. This is one of my favorite times of the year. I absolutely love looking at these guys, but it's draft week. We're going to see where a lot of these guys land. And instead of looking at them, now we're going to be looking at how they fit with their new teams. And that's where things pick up. And that's where fantasy football really starts to kick into gear. You're going to start needing to do way more research very soon. So if you're starting to come back, turn on the bell notification so you don't miss any of the new content that we drop. Make sure you hit that like button as well. Let me know that you appreciate the content. Headliner Nation, I will see you with tons of information Thursday, Friday, Saturday, who knows, maybe Sunday. I don't know what the rest of the weekend's going to look like. Hopefully the NFL draft is great, though, and it's going to bring a ton of content, so make sure you're here for it right away. Peace out, Headliner Nation. Stay safe and stay healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.